very much for the organizers for providing this opportunity, especially that it is also my first time presenting my research at the CEA event. And I think my presentation is positioned to a perfect place. While Alexandra talked about refugees and Simon about border protection, my presentation is kind of an intersection of the two areas of law. And being one of the last speakers, it also allows me to reflect on certain presentations of the conference and provide some outlook for future wayfinding. That's why I intend to first summarize my impressions about recent EU legislative processes by listing certain paradoxes and misconceptions, then turn to the most recent innovative wayfindings. But first, we need to be aware of the present migration challenges in practical terms before seeking legal responses, and we have heard some practical insight, indeed, already. Here I have some EU numbers. The number of irregular border crossings at the EU's external border in 2023 reached a total of approximately 380,000, driven by a rise in arrivals via the Mediterranean region. And this marks the highest level since 2016, and also constitutes a 17% increase from the figures in 2022. So it definitely indicates a consistent upward trend over the past 3 years, meaning after the COVID pandemic. Furthermore, what we see from the asylum statistics is that approximately 60%, so the majority of the asylum seekers, are not eligible for international protection. And finally, the return of those illegally staying, it's extremely ineffective. Out of the 410,000 return decisions, less than 22% could be implemented and effectively returned. So almost 80% of those not eligible for a legal stay or international protection can still remain on the territory of the EU. So, given this quite extensive list of migration challenges that we need to face, we have the new reforms presently being adopted. These new reforms in the framework of the new Pact on Migration and Asylum are being promoted by the majority of the member states and the Commission as a great success, especially as we are getting towards the EP elections that necessitate showing towards EU citizens that the sense of having the power and capability to manage migration. Yet, if we get familiar with the elements of the reforms, as we had the chance to do so in the past 2 days, we can kind of doubt that it would really be fit to provide effective legal responses. And I think the reasons behind this, that there are a number of paradoxes and misconceptions as regards EU decision-making and legislation, from which I have collected a number of them. So let's start with the paradoxes. And the very first one was already revealed by the previous speaker, namely that we are aiming at effective border protection and fight against migrant smuggling networks, while we have an obligation to allow entry to anyone claiming asylum. And we have a legal basis for them, especially in the Schengen Borders Code, that that regulation shall apply without prejudice to the right of refugees and asylum seekers, which is practically applied in a way that regardless of any tense situation or a sudden influx at the border, anyone claiming asylum needs to be let in, And even if border procedure is applied in line with the present acquis or the new reforms, after a maximum of 4 weeks, or in the future 12 weeks, they should be let into the territory of the EU if their asylum procedure is still ongoing. What are the problems with this paradox? It necessitates huge capacities to provide border protection. While 60% of those arriving illegally at the external borders are not eligible for that, and they can only be temporarily held up and cannot be effectively returned, even if return decision is issued. And this clearly does not allow an effective border protection, even in cases, for example, of instrumentalization of migrants that have been happening at several eastern border sections with Belarus, with Russia. Presently, Finland actually keeps its borders closed towards Russia, exactly because of the instrumentalization of migrants, namely that migrants are tools in the hands of those regimes. So it's practically human smugglers deciding who enters the territory of the EU and not member states. And furthermore, it also points to controversies that while member states with external border sections have to allow entry to their territories, member states with internal borders can actually reintroduce internal border controls, officially temporarily, but as we could also hear yesterday, it can turn into a more permanent practice. My second paradox is that we still have the design in our head that we need to have a legal framework for a normal situation, for a non-pressure situation. And we just heard that, for example, the time limits of the Dublin regulation were especially designed for these normal, non-pressure migratory situations. While what we can presently, and actually in the past years, already experience is an always constantly increasing number of irregular arrivals, and there is a constant migratory pressure at the external borders. And it's not just the present asylum acquis that was designed for non-pressure situations, but even the recent reforms suggest that the Commission should be responsible for setting out annual relocation target numbers with a minimum of 30,000 per year. Well, let's just compare it to the 380,000 irregular arrivals that I was talking about. So we can actually see that that is something not comparable. In the meantime, I'm not convinced that relocating migrants from frontline member states would actually solve the situation. It may even have rather a pull factor effect. The new pact also covers a so-called crisis regulation, which sets out special rules, a special solidarity mechanism for special situations. But we are indeed in special situations constantly. So I'm just wondering why the legislation is still designed for non-pressure situations as a main rule, if those are not able to manage what we really facing presently. My third paradox is that each member state's situation is different, and effective tailor-made solutions are needed. While, as we could hear, EU rules are made as a result of compromise package deals adopted by qualified majority in the Council. So as Simon also put it, the result of the trilogues is a trade-based law. And the outcome of the legislation many times reflects the preferences and positions of the big dominating member states. Yesterday, the third keynote speech also mentioned that in the field of shared competence, the principle of subsidiarity is of key importance, and EU legislation cannot really disregard the key necessities of the member states. Apart from paradoxes, let's face the misconceptions as well. And the second keynote speech yesterday highlighted the fact that no appropriate impact assessment was actually carried out before launching the new reform proposals. And this is a very ideal situation for our misconceptions to thrive. What are these? First, that we can manage the situation by selecting migrants at the external border. Border procedure is not new. The new element is that it would become compulsory in case of certain categories of migrants arriving at the border. And we heard of airport border procedures, while it was Hungary first applying border procedure at the land borders since 2015 in the so-called transit zones. From which asylum seekers all just moved onward once they were let into the territory of the country, as their asylum procedures were still ongoing. The second misconception is that we can release pressure from frontline member states by relocating migrants to other member states. I would rather say that it may even have a pull factor effect, meaning smugglers could feel encouraged to bring further migrants to the external borders if they can be assured that those asylum seekers are going to be transferred to a second member state. And Alexander was pointing out the human factor, and here we also need to point out the human factor. Migrants themselves rather choose illegal secondary movement within the Schengen area rather than stay in the member state dedicated to them. And this was exactly the reason why the Czech Republic stopped relocating in line with the 2015 relocation decisions, because first they intended to fulfill their obligations, but once they saw that those being relocated just vanish after a short time, then they saw no point in actually fulfilling those obligations. And a third, but very crucial misconception is that we have indefinite capacities and financial resources available to provide for these legislative elements. We dedicate most of our capacities under the thought that we are fulfilling our task of providing international protection, while most of those in need are actually not helped in real terms. In the meantime, we spend most of our capacities on those not eligible for international protection, and as a result, our systems are already overburdened. And just to give you a very Monty Python-like example, if it wasn't real, I would actually put it in a Monty Python scene. Bailiffs this January seized the freezer and the coffee machine from the office of Belgium's junior minister for migration to enforce a court ruling in a case brought by 20 asylum seekers who were left homeless for several months in Brussels. So it could cost you your coffee machine as well, even for the minister. So should we just accept the fact that the EU wishes us to bear the consequences of unwanted compromises that do not actually provide effective solutions? Well, on the first night's dinner, I was told a joke. I'm not telling by who. the essence of which was the lawyers do not give a definite answer to an obvious mathematical question, but first ask what you want the result to be. So the creativity of lawyers are well known, and so this situation can also be understood as a situation that needs the creativity of lawyers, where we are the ones who tell what results we actually wish to have. So what are these results? Providing international protection to those eligible, but as close to their country of origin as possible, and respecting the principle of non-refoulement. Effectively avoiding, inviting economic migrants choosing illegal migration. We want to break the business model of human smugglers, and as a result, we want to save the lives of migrants, save them from drowning in the Mediterranean. At the same time, we have to make the best use of our capacities, both in terms of financial resources and our staff. In the meantime, we have to share responsibilities as well as burdens, both in terms of protecting borders and providing help to those in need. And we also need to be able to protect our territory and society from international criminal networks and terrorism. Yes, this is a huge challenge. And it seems that more and more the term externalization or extraterritoriality comes to the mind of those ready to think outside the box, even if critical voices are constantly heard regarding this area. There are many skeptics and even more critics, yet even the European Commission acknowledges that there may be a need for such innovative ideas. And I think externalization can appear in various ways, and we might put them into two categories. My first example for this would be the EU forming partnerships with neighboring countries. Let us just think of the EU-Turkey deal in March 2016, or the most recent EU-Tunisia comprehensive partnership agreement, and a similar one being formed with Egypt. These are of more strategic nature, and they follow a holistic perspective, covering many areas of cooperation, and migration only being one, including border protection, but also asylum capacity development. A more controversial form of externalization is the extraterritoriality in examining asylum application. And the first of these ideas were formed by the United Kingdom and later on by Denmark, that we may just refer to as the so-called Rwanda model, where asylum seekers already on the territory of a state would be transferred to a transit country for the sake of carrying out the examination of eligibility for international protection, as well as principle of non-refoulement. And Rwanda was chosen for this based on various aspects. But choosing Rwanda is not new. Actually, the EU also managed an emergency transit mechanism where migrants from Libya were transferred to Rwanda for the sake of such examination. But to tell the truth, there is a very important other aspect in the picture. EU law does not allow such transit from the EU territory to a third country, and that's why it's presently an ex-member state and a member state having opt-out, which are experimenting with this initiative. But there is the very recent cooperation between Italy and Albania, which is not yet under implementation. But the basis of this is that before reaching EU territory, this examination of the asylum claims should be carried out, still following the necessary legal requirements. And for this reason, 2 facilities would be set up in Albania, but they would fully be run by Italy, while it fast-tracks the asylum requests. And Italy would remain legally responsible for the migrants throughout the process. And only those rescued by the Italian authorities during sea rescue at international waters would be carried to these facilities. And there is another interesting element to this initiative, that following a preliminary evaluation, the Commission itself found the plan to be compatible with EU law, as it classified the system being outside the scope of EU law. Obviously, the questions, a number of questions regarding the details and the practices of the implementation remain, and we need to be patient for the implementation of this new initiative. My conclusion is that we can't just lean back after the asylum reforms of the Asylum and Migration Pact are adopted. Quite the opposite. Based on the paradoxes and the misconceptions I intended to shed a light on, we have to be prepared that the new reforms would not necessarily provide an effective solution for the recent migration challenges. And given the recent years' tendency of illegal entries, it is high time that we take the innovative proposals seriously and dedicate further energy to examine them. And of course, I would be more than happy to hear your views on whether such innovations could have a place in the legal framework of the EU asylum system. So thank you for your attention.